Welcome to a deep dive, into cybersecurity in Nigeria. We've got some pretty cool sources here, like reports and guidelines, and even a look at a homegrown cybersecurity solution that seems to be making some waves.
Yeah.
So our mission today, I guess, is to try to understand the challenges that businesses are facing, in this ever-changing landscape.
Yeah.
And how a proactive approach, using some seriously innovative solutions can really make a difference.
Yeah, what's really fascinating is that Nigeria's financial system is seeing just huge growth, right? More products, more services, more players. But the thing is, with that comes, a much larger attack surface for cyber criminals. And it seems like the CBN, the Central Bank of Nigeria, is very aware of this. They've actually released a framework outlining the minimum cybersecurity controls for deposit money banks and payment service banks.
So they're not messing around.
Yeah.
This framework isn't just like a, suggestion box. It's setting a really high bar for what's expected from these institutions.
Yeah.
So what kind of picture does this framework actually paint of the threats that Nigerian financial institutions are actually up against?
Well, it paints a pretty serious picture. The CBN highlights a whole laundry list of potential problems. Phishing attacks that target employees and customers, ransomware that can completely shut down operations, and of course the ever-present DDoS attacks, which are designed to just knock systems offline. But the real key here is understanding vulnerabilities. The CBN is really pushing for institutions to go beyond simply reacting to attacks. They're calling for, regular vulnerability assessments and penetration testing. Essentially, they're trying to find and fix weak spots before the attackers can even get to them.
It's like they're running a constant security audit looking for any cracks in the armor. This kind of leads us to something pretty interesting. There's a software solution called Abatis, developed by a company called Platinum High Integrity Technologies, that seems to be making a lot of noise in this area.
Abatis is really tackling a huge pain point for a lot of organizations. Vendor fatigue and endpoint security. Just imagine having to manage security from, 10 or 12 different vendors, all the updates, all the interfaces. It's a nightmare. Abatis offers this consolidated approach. So instead of this, patchwork of solutions, you have one powerful platform.
So streamlined security. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
definitely interested. Tell me what makes this solution stand out, especially in the context of, what the CBN is outlining in their framework.
Well, one of the most interesting things about Abatis is how it operates. It actually sits at the kernel level of your operating system, so basically at the core of your computer, and it intercepts file writes, which prevents malware from even getting a foothold. You can think of it like a security guard that checks everyone's ID at the door. Only authorized personnel are allowed in.
Okay, so they're taking a very hands-on approach to security, but does it actually work with what the CBN is recommending? Does it support their push for this proactive security culture?
Oh, absolutely. Abatis actually makes it easier to do those vulnerability assessments that the CBN is emphasizing. It helps institutions identify and address weak points before they actually turn into, full-blown breaches. And on top of all that, Abatis brings something really important to the table for Nigeria's cyber sovereignty.
Now, that's a term we hear a lot these days. What does it actually mean in this context, and why is it so important for a country like Nigeria?
Well, cyber sovereignty basically means having control over your own digital destiny. And with Abatis, all data is kept local within Nigeria's borders, subject to, its own laws and regulations. And this is a huge deal in a world where data is constantly flowing across borders. It really shows that Abatis is aligned with Nigeria's national interests.
So it's not just about protecting data, it's about keeping it under Nigerian control. This seems to fit perfectly with what the CBN is trying to do with its framework. It's about empowering Nigerian institutions to really take ownership of their own cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But let's get into some specifics about Abatis. What makes it so different from traditional antivirus or security software? How does it actually protect against, these increasingly sophisticated threats that we're seeing?
It's one thing to say you're effective, but actually shows it in real-world scenarios. It's not just about blocking known threats. It's about preventing unauthorized code from ever being executed, even zero-day threats that can slip past traditional antivirus.
So it's less about chasing after known bad guys and more about locking the doors before anyone known or unknown can get in.
That's a great way to put it. And it's this proactive approach that really aligns with the CBN's vision. On top of that, Abatis actually offers something that's pretty unique in the cybersecurity world, a CISO as a service model.
Okay, I'll admit you've got my attention.
Yeah.
Break that down for me. What exactly does that mean, and why is it relevant to this conversation?
Well, think of it as having a virtual chief information security officer on call all the time. This is a total game changer, especially for, smaller organizations that might not have the budget to actually hire a full-time CISO Abatis, is basically providing that cybersecurity expertise as a service, making it accessible to a much wider range of businesses.
Now, before we get too deep into the specifics of how Abatis works its magic, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger cybersecurity landscape in Nigeria. We've touched on some of the threats the CBN has highlighted in its framework, but let's break those down a bit further. Let's start with phishing, something that it seems like everyone has run into at some point. What makes phishing such a concern, especially in the financial sector? And how does Abatis, with its unique security approach, actually help reduce this risk?
Well, phishing is a huge concern because financial institutions handle such sensitive information, right? Account numbers, passwords, transaction details, and these attacks are getting so much more sophisticated. Hackers are getting really good at mimicking legitimate companies, creating emails that look totally real and prey on people's emotions like urgency or fear. It only takes one wrong click for an attacker to get access to all that valuable data.
So it's all about exploiting human trust and taking advantage of those moments of vulnerability. How does Abatis actually handle this challenge? Do they rely on user education, or do they take a more technological approach?
User education is definitely always important, but Abatis takes a more multi-layered approach to phishing protection. It combines behavioral analysis with its core function of controlling file execution.
Yeah.
So even if a user is tricked into clicking on a bad link, Abatis can still stop the payload, the harmful part of the attack, from running.
So it's like having a safety net. Even if you make a mistake, Abatis is there to catch you before you fall. That's a pretty reassuring thought in a world where phishing attacks are so common.
Absolutely. And this same approach extends to other threats, too. Take ransomware, for instance.
Ransomware. The one that basically holds your data hostage and demands a ransom to get it back.
Yeah.
We've seen some pretty high-profile cases where companies have had to pay millions to get access to their own data again.
Yeah, and the impact goes way beyond just the money. There's the disruption to business, the potential loss of customer trust, and all the regulatory scrutiny. It's a real nightmare scenario. But Abatis, again, takes this multi-layered approach. By preventing unauthorized code from running, it can often stop ransomware dead in its tracks before it has a chance to even encrypt your files.
So it's not just about finding known ransomware variants. It's about stopping anything that looks suspicious from running in the first place.
Exactly. It's about moving from a reactive approach to a proactive one. And that's really the heart of what Abatis and the CBN framework are all about.
So it sounds like we're moving away from this world where we're always trying to catch up to the criminals and into a world where we're actually setting the rules of the game. That's a pretty powerful shift.
It really is. And it's a shift that requires more than just technology. It needs a whole change in mindset. We have to start thinking about security as an integral part of everything we do online, not just something we tack on at the end.
And that brings us to our next segment, where we'll really dive into the nitty-gritty of Abatis and how it's actually changing the game in endpoint security. We'll explore how its unique features translate into real-world protection and how it's helping to create a safer digital environment in Nigeria.
Welcome back. Let's dive into how Abatis actually gets this level of protection. You mentioned it operates at the kernel level of the operating system. Can you maybe explain a little more about what that means and why it's so important for security?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. It sounds like Abatis has a pretty privileged position within the whole computer system.
It does. The kernel is like the heart of the operating system. It manages all the core functions. And by working at this level, Abatis can see pretty much everything that's going on, which gives it a big advantage over those traditional security solutions that operate at a higher level.
So it's kind of like having a security camera that can see into every room of the house, not just the front door.
That's a great way to put it. And because Abatis is so deeply integrated, it's really hard for malware to just bypass or disable it. Traditional antivirus software can be tricked or manipulated by more advanced malware, but Abatis is a lot tougher to fool.
This makes me think about those fileless attacks we talked about before. They're so tricky because they use legitimate tools that are already on the system. So does working at the kernel level give Abatis an edge in detecting and stopping these kinds of attacks?
Definitely. By monitoring activity at the kernel level, Abatis can tell when those legitimate tools are being used for something malicious. It's like having a security guard who can tell when someone is trying to break into a door with a screwdriver instead of using it to fix a loose hinge.
So it's not just about what tools are being used, but how they're being used. That's a pretty impressive level of insight.
It is, and this ability to spot and stop unauthorized code from running is especially effective against those zero-day exploits, the ones that nobody knows about yet, so there's no patch for them.
Yeah, zero-day exploits are a big problem because they give attackers a way to get around all the usual security defenses. Until there's a patch, you're basically wide open.
That's true, but Abatis can help with that risk because it doesn't rely on signatures or knowing about specific vulnerabilities. It focuses on behavior blocking anything that doesn't look right.
So it's like having a security system that's always on high alert, watching for anything unusual, whether it's a known threat or something brand new.
Exactly. And that proactive approach is a real game changer in the fight against cybercrime. Instead of waiting for attacks to happen and then cleaning up the mess, Abatis helps organizations stop those attacks before they can even really start.
And this brings us back to the CBN and their focus on proactive cybersecurity readiness. It seems like Abatis fits in perfectly with that vision.
It does. By making it easier to do vulnerability assessments and improving cybersecurity practices within organizations, Abatis is helping to build a real security-first culture in Nigeria.
And as we talked about before, this goes beyond just protecting individual companies. It's about building up that local cybersecurity expertise, creating a workforce that can handle the challenges of this digital world.
And Abatis is a big part of that effort, not just by selling their product, but by investing in training and development, helping to grow a new generation of cybersecurity professionals right here in Nigeria.
That focus on local expertise is really important when you think about cyber sovereignty.
For sure. By keeping data local and building up domestic expertise, Nigeria is taking control of its own digital destiny. They're less reliant on foreign solutions, and that strengthens their national security.
This idea of aligning with national interests is something that really sets Abatis apart from a lot of other cybersecurity companies. It's not just a business, it's a partner in Nigeria's digital transformation.
And that partnership is clear in how Abatis is working with the CBN and other groups to raise awareness, build capacity, and create a more secure digital world for all Nigerians.
We've talked a lot about the technical side of Abatis, but there's a human side to this story too. We talked about the CISO as a service model earlier. Could you maybe go into more detail about what that means and how it helps businesses?
Sure. The CISO as a service model is basically a way for businesses to get access to top-level cybersecurity expertise without having to hire a full-time chief information security officer. This is especially helpful for smaller companies that might not have the budget for a dedicated CISO.
So it's like having a cybersecurity consultant on retainer, ready to give advice on strategy, put security policies in place, and deal with incidents if they happen.
Exactly. And this model is becoming more and more popular all over the world because businesses are realizing they need specialized cybersecurity help, but it's really hard to find and keep qualified people.
And in a place like Nigeria, where the need for cybersecurity professionals is growing so fast, this model just makes sense.
It does. It lets businesses get the expertise they need without having to fight for talent in a really tight market. And by providing this service, Abatis is actually helping to close that skills gap and contributing to the growth of the cybersecurity industry in Nigeria.
It's like they're not just selling a product, they're investing in the future of cybersecurity for the whole country.
And that investment is paying off. We're seeing more and more businesses in Nigeria starting to think about security first. And Abatis is a big reason for that shift.
Now, for those listening who want to learn more about Abatis and how it might fit into their own security plans, where can they go to get more information?
They can go to the Abatis Nigeria website at www.abatis-nigeria.com. They'll find a ton of resources there, including case studies, technical information, and details about their CISO as a service model.
That's great. We'll make sure to put that link in the show notes too.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, the overall cybersecurity landscape in Nigeria. We've covered phishing and ransomware, but the CBN framework also mentioned the threat of DDoS attacks. Can you tell us what those are and how Abatis can help with that risk?
Sure. A DDoS attack, or a distributed denial of service attack, is basically a way to flood a server or network with traffic so that legitimate users can't access it. It's like when a website or online service suddenly goes down. That's the kind of disruption a DDoS attack can cause.
And in today's digital world where businesses rely so much on online services, that kind of disruption can be a disaster.
It can. And DDoS attacks are getting more common and more sophisticated. Attackers can rent botnets, which are networks of hacked computers, to launch these attacks. They're pretty cheap and easy to use, which makes them a popular tool for cybercriminals.
So how does Abatis deal with this particular threat? Does it have built-in DDoS protection, or is it more about that overall proactive security approach we've been talking about?
Abatis doesn't specifically focus on stopping DDoS attacks, but its main functions of controlling how files are executed and spotting unusual behavior can actually help to reduce the risk.
Can you give us an example of how that might work in the real world?
Sure. Let's say an attacker is trying to put malware on a system to use it in a DDoS attack. With its ability to control how files run, Abatis can stop that malware from getting installed in the first place, which throws a wrench in the attacker's plan.
So even though it's not specifically designed to stop DDoS attacks, Abatis can still provide some protection by preventing the installation of malicious software that could be used in those attacks.
Exactly. And this shows why it's so important to have a well-rounded approach to cybersecurity. It's not just about having the right tools for each specific threat. It's about making your whole environment secure so that attackers can't get in no matter what methods they use.
And that's where Abatis really stands out. With its proactive approach, its focus on behavior analysis, and its deep integration with the operating system.
Absolutely. It's really changing the game in cybersecurity, and it's helping to build a safer digital future for Nigeria.
Now let's switch gears for a bit and talk about another aspect of Abatis that I find really interesting, its ability to handle persistent threats. These are the attacks that are designed to stay hidden and operate under the radar for a long time, often to steal sensitive data or mess with systems. How does Abatis deal with this kind of sneaky and dangerous cyber tech?
Persistent threats are a big worry because they're so hard to find. They often use custom-made tools and techniques that nobody's seen before, and they're designed to blend in with the normal activity on the system.
So it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the needle's always moving and changing shape.
Exactly. Traditional security solutions that rely on recognizing specific patterns or known attacks often have a hard time identifying these threats.
But Abatis takes a different approach with its focus on behavior analysis.
Right. Instead of looking for specific things, Abatis looks at how files are being written and run. And if it sees anything suspicious, it blocks it right away. It's like having a security guard who can spot suspicious behavior even if they've never seen that particular person before.
So it's about setting up a baseline of what normal activity looks like, and then watching for anything that deviates from that.
Exactly. And because Abatis works at the kernel level, it has a really clear view of everything happening on the system, which makes it much harder for persistent threats to stay hidden.
This makes me wonder about legacy systems, which are often more vulnerable to persistent threats because they might not be getting those regular security updates. Does Abatis offer any protection for these older systems?
It does. One of the great things about Abatis is that it can protect both modern and legacy systems.
That's a huge advantage, especially in a country like Nigeria, where a lot of organizations still use older software and hardware.
Absolutely. And it really shows how flexible and adaptable Abatis is. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's a platform that can be customized to the specific needs of each organization.
So whether you're a big financial institution with all the latest technology, or a smaller business still using older systems, Abatis can give you a level of protection that's made for your specific situation.
That's right. And that's one of the things that makes Abatis so appealing in the Nigerian market. It's not just about the technology, it's about understanding the unique challenges that businesses face and providing solutions that are both effective and practical.
And this brings us back to that broader thing we've been talking about, the importance of having a proactive approach to cybersecurity. With its ability to spot and stop a wide range of threats, its focus on behavior analysis, and its commitment to cyber sovereignty, Abatis is a great example of how being proactive can really make a difference in fighting cybercrime.
It's a message that's really resonating with businesses and policymakers in Nigeria. We're seeing a real shift towards putting security first, and Abatis is leading the way.
Now, before we wrap up this part, I want to talk about something else about Abatis that I find interesting. Its potential to help the Nigerian economy grow. We've talked about its impact on cybersecurity, but I'm wondering what you think about how this kind of innovation can benefit other parts of the economy.
That's a good question. I think the success of Abatis could really inspire other tech entrepreneurs in Nigeria. It shows that it's possible to create world-class solutions that meet the needs of the local market.
So it's about building a culture of innovation, a belief that Nigerian companies can compete on a global level.
Exactly. And as the cybersecurity sector grows in Nigeria, it will create jobs, attract investment, and help the digital economy as a whole.
It's a ripple effect, with Abatis acting as a catalyst for growth and innovation in the tech world.
And that's why things like Abatis are so important. They're not just about solving problems right now. They're about laying the groundwork for a safer and more prosperous future for Nigeria.
Now, for those who want to learn more about Abatis and how it might work for them, we'll be sure to include a link to their website in the show notes.
They can visit www.abatis-nigeria.com to find out more about the technology, the CISO as a service model, and how the company is working to create a more secure digital world in Nigeria.
This has been a really interesting look into the world of cybersecurity in Nigeria, and it's clear that Abatis is a major player. Their proactive approach, their focus on behavior analysis, and their commitment to cyber sovereignty make them a great choice for organizations that want to improve their defenses in this increasingly complex threat landscape.
And as we've talked about, their impact goes beyond just individual businesses. They're helping to grow the cybersecurity industry in Nigeria, building up local skills, and working towards a more secure digital future for the entire country.
Now, as we move into our final segment, I want to focus on what's next. We've talked about the current state of cybersecurity in Nigeria, the challenges and opportunities, and how Abatis is shaping this landscape. But what about the future? What trends are you seeing in cybersecurity, like globally and specifically in Nigeria, that could affect how we approach security in the next few years?
That's a really good question. Globally, we're seeing artificial intelligence and machine learning. They're evolving so quickly, and both attackers and defenders are using these technologies. It's kind of like an arms race in cybersecurity.
So the tools are getting smarter on both sides of the fight.
Exactly. And that means that those traditional security approaches, the ones that rely on static rules and signatures, they're becoming less effective. We need solutions that can learn and adapt. Solutions that can actually predict new threats before they even show up.
It sounds like that proactive approach we've been talking about is more important than ever.
It really is. And in Nigeria, we're seeing people becoming more aware of this need to be proactive about security. The CBN framework is a good example of that change in thinking. But just being aware isn't enough. We need to see that awareness turn into action, into investments in cybersecurity solutions and in developing those skills.
And that's where companies like Abatis, with their focus on building local capacity, can really make a difference.
For sure. They're not just selling a product. They're actually helping to build a whole culture of cybersecurity in Nigeria. And that's so important for long-term success in this digital age.
So it's not just about buying the latest software. It's about building a foundation of knowledge and expertise that can adapt as the threats change.
Right. And it's about getting the government industry and academia all working together to make sure that Nigeria is ready to handle the challenges and the opportunities of this digital world.
It sounds like there's some real momentum building in Nigeria around cybersecurity.
There is, and it's really exciting to see Nigeria has the potential to be a leader in cybersecurity in Africa and maybe even globally. But to get there, they'll need to keep investing, keep innovating, and stay committed to that proactive security approach.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into cybersecurity in Nigeria. We've covered a lot today, from the regulations to the specific threats that businesses are facing and the innovative solutions that are being developed.
And we've seen how Abatis, with its unique way of handling endpoint security, is making a real impact in Nigeria.
For our listeners who want to learn more about this topic, I highly recommend checking out the Abatis Nigeria website at www.abatis-nigeria.com. They have tons of resources there, like case studies, technical details, and information about their really innovative CISO as a service model.
It's a great place to start for anyone who wants to learn more about protecting their organization from cyber threats.
And as you think about your own cybersecurity strategy, remember, being proactive is not a choice anymore. It's a necessity. Embrace innovation, build up your internal expertise, and create a culture of cybersecurity that focuses on prevention. In the world of cybersecurity, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay secure.